Hello, everybody. I'm Andrew Boudry. Welcome to Your Bread and Butter podcast.
And I'm Ryan Cummings. Today's episode is Retire in Mint Condition, Part 2. We'll talk about actually building the plan. The first episode, we talked about planning your retirement. Well, now it's actually, how do you actually put that plan in motion and get into retirement with confidence?
Speaking of motion, do you know why the retiree bought a rocking chair?
I don't.
It was simply so he could move without going anywhere. See you soon.
Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a registered broker-dealer. Member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Private Financial Design LLC are not affiliated.
Bread and butter.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're talking about retirement condition, part 2. So we covered some of this in the first session on part 1. And what we did was give you a broad overview about some things that might get cheaper. You got debt payments, mortgage, loans, credit card debt. We talk about working, commuting costs being cheaper, income taxes, clothing. Some things, though, they get a little bit more expensive with healthcare costs, Medicare, out-of-pocket costs, home repairs, cost of living, and inflation's always there. So now we move on, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those things from a practical standpoint.
Yeah, I think if you watched our last episode, we talked about identifying these things in retirement, but then how do you actually apply them to a plan? And I think that's where, this part of the discussion comes in is, some things might get cheaper. Some things might get more expensive. But when you're actually building your plan and building your retirement projection, for example, if you're using a software of some kind, we use a software through a company called eMoney. It's branded as our Click client software, Click Advisor. But that being said, when you're looking at a lot of these expenses, we'll start with the ones that get cheaper. When you're building that into your projection, you want to really only account for what is actually going to be different than your current spending.
So you take your current spending and you lay that out as your preliminary budget.
Yes, that's always a great place to start, because if you're a couple years out from retirement, you might not know exactly what your retirement budget's going to look like. It's going to be a little bit of a working target until you actually get there and you actually see what that lifestyle's like. But you start with your existing spending and you add or subtract the things that get cheaper, add the things that get more expensive, the differences that you think are going to be there in retirement. So for example, your mortgage payments. For some people, their goal, their plan is to have their mortgage paid off in retirement. Well, I think a mistake there is just wiping that off of your budget, because while your mortgage might be paid off, you're still going to likely be paying property taxes, which was probably part of your mortgage if you escrow, like most people, and your homeowner's insurance. Again, if you're like most people, you escrow that into your mortgage payment. That portion of your mortgage payment is still going to be there.
And if you live near water of any sort these days, flood insurance through the wonderful world of FEMA is likely to double. So if your flood insurance premium near the water is $1,000, within a couple years, it's probably likely to be about $2,000 or $3,000. Yes. Or if you're near the ocean and your property flood insurance is like $5,000, you're going to be looking over the next couple of years to be paying $10,000. And the reason for that is that FEMA's broke. So that's just a little side note for those of you by the water.
So you want to factor those insurances in too, because they're not necessarily going away. And to your point, they might actually be that more expensive category. Now, some of the other things that, again, people also think might get cheaper, commuting. We talked about that last time. But what if it doesn't? What if it only decreases a little bit? Because you might not be paying for public transportation, or if you're going into the city to go to work or something like that, but you're going to be driving your car more. Is there an increased cost there? So I think the theme here, as you're seeing with most of this stuff, is we're only factoring the differences. There's going to be a change. Yes, something might go away, but what if there's an increase that replaces it? You don't want to just knock off the decrease without accounting for the increase. For example, income taxes is another one too. Like we talked about last time, some income taxes might decrease, some might go up. And then clothing. Yeah, you might need to spend less on work clothes, but are you going to be doing more outdoorsy activities where you need to, get a new outfit for your pickleball games or some new hiking shoes or whatever it might be. Is this going to be replacing it? So is it really a decreased cost? That's the kind of theme of this, is when you're applying these changes to your actual scenario, it's just a simple addition and subtraction. Is subtract the decrease, but don't forget to add the increase.
I think the critical point here, Ryan, is that people understand that there is a budget process. So when people are first starting out in their career and in life, and we sit down with them, we walk out a budget so that they can save money, have money for their apartments. And maybe in those middle years and income earning years, people don't really look at the budget a whole lot. They just more look like what's in the checkbook kind of thing, and they figure out how to get through it. Well, in retirement, you can't just kind of like guess. You can't guess. You actually have to know the numbers. So you take your working budget, you take your working expenses, the way you're living right now, and actually a lot of it comes off of your tax return, is to show you what your lifestyle can be. So let's move on. We'll go to some more practical suggestions as you've looked at some of the charts that things might get cheaper, might get more expensive. Let's take some more real world look. Here it is. When can you retire? There's just not one perfect age.
There's not. I think I had clients ask me, family, friends, well, what's retirement age these days? There is no retirement age. Now, often they're talking about something else. We'll dive into some of those milestones in a second. But retirement age can be whatever age you want it to be. There is not an age that you quote unquote can retire. It's just essentially, do you have the means to do so? Now, some of those milestones that I think a lot of people are referring to, one of the big ones, age 59 and a half.
Yeah.
So that's the age you can begin taking qualified distributions from your retirement accounts. So to put that in layman's terms for people out there that don't know what that means, well, that's distributions from your 401ks, your IRAs, that have no penalty. So you'll still pay taxes, but there's a 10% penalty that's associated with these accounts if you touch them early. Once you're over that 59 and a half, in most cases, there's some select exceptions here and there, but once you're over that age 59 and a half, that's when typically that penalty, that 10% additional tax is gone at that age. So that could be one age that some people think of as quote unquote retirement. But again, if you have the means to do so, you could just as easily retire before that. Now, another one, Social Security. Social Security it's a range. 62 to 70 is the range that you can begin collecting Social Security. But when a lot of people think of Social Security, they sometimes think of the starting earliest age, 62, or for a lot of people, and again, I've seen this, is they think of the retirement age as being their full age, which for, depending on the year you were born, it's 66, 67, maybe 66 in a couple months. It all depends on what year you were born. So while yes, that's your full age, that you get the full benefit from Social Security, you don't necessarily need your full benefit to retire.
Yeah, I mean, people that are born after 1958, pretty much 67 is your full Social Security. But to your point, at age 65, everybody goes on Medicare now. Even if you're covered underneath your employer plan, you still have to sign up for Medicare A, so you don't get, penalized. So you got to do that. If you take it early at age 62 on your Social Security, you're going to lose considerable amount of money. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But you can retire at any age if you have the means and a plan to do so. So basically, there's a thing called the FIRE movement, which is financial independence, retire early, which is a great concept. But you better start in your 30s. Maybe early 40s if you want to do that. So
I think it's becoming a more popular movement. And to your point, if you're going to do it, you have to start early. You have to be aggressive. And when I say aggressive, I mean, we're talking saving significant chunks, 20, 30 or more % of your income each and every year. And you also are having to understand, well, where are you putting that money? It can't all go in those retirement accounts. Because like we just talked about, well, that's 59 and a half. For most cases, to collect that money.
Right.
If you want money sooner, you want to be part of that FIRE movement and retire at 50 or 55, well, you need money in other sources that is accessible, penalty-free to make that happen.
And by the way, playing the lottery is not a good plan for doing some of this.
It is not.
So let's talk a little bit here on our next chart. So this is just a very straightforward approach. There's not one perfect age. But again, you can retire at any age if you have the means and the plan to do so. And that's the most important topic you should understand today. The means and the plan to do so. And that's really what our job is as advisors, is to find out what your plans are, what your needs are, and what your wants are, so you can put that into motion. So.
Yeah, when we're building that plan, like you mentioned, that first step, as we talked about in the last episode, and I want to reiterate it in this one, is figuring out that cost. Like we were looking at the beginning slides, what's more expensive, what's less expensive, factor in those differences, add the things in, subtract the things away that are going to change. But then once you've come up with that cost, once you've established that baseline that you need to meet, it's now, again, the next step to that math problem that we keep talking about here of, well, do your inflows match the outflows? And, I think you have a saying of something around inflows and outflows that we...
if the inflows don't match the outflows, something got to go.
Yes. And so, and I think that's actually, it's a practical point, though. If what's coming in doesn't meet and what's going out, you have to make a change.
Painful.
And so the next piece, though, of that is, well, we talked about what's going out, the expenses. Well, what about what's coming in? What are your income sources that you want to factor into this overall plan as you're looking at your retirement?
Yeah.
So there's some fixed sources.
There are some fixed sources. Yeah. And I think people forget that, Social Security is a fixed income source.
Right.
And it is a good baseline, but it's not going to provide everything in retirement. In fact, if Social Security represents 30% of your retirement income, you're actually in a good spot. If it's representing anything higher than 50% of your retirement income, it may not be the best spot, but then you got to overcome
Now, what are
that.
your thoughts on, you say Social Security is a fixed income source. What are your thoughts on the people that question Social Security down the line?
So the idea about Social Security is that Social Security is an embedded part of our financial system. So for people that think that and hear all these rumors and all of this conspiracy talk about it going away, there would actually, I believe, would be a major uproar in our country.
I agree.
That would actually dismantle the government because it is so ingrained and built within our financial system. I do not believe that Social Security is a threat for anybody that's actually at a loss of it at your age or older. It could very well be for your children and my grandchildren something that has to be significantly modified in order for it to succeed. There does need to be some reforms there, but we're not here to talk about reforming the federal government. Other income that can be fixed would be, again, pensions that come from a company, and pensions have been...
Or state pensions.
Or state pensions.
Teachers.
Or from teachers, or government workers, which at this point, it's likely, I believe, in the next generation, next 25 years, I don't think pensions are actually going to be a part of the future, but that's my own...
We're already seeing it. I mean,
we're already seeing that.
It's. I think it's something you see private companies. Pensions are very rare. It used to be a day where you worked for a big corporation, you got a pension. They paid in it for you, and they're now few and far between. And the reason is, well, they're less profitable for these companies. And so, I think the dynamic there, you already kind of alluded to it, is if it's not profitable for private organizations, is it profitable for government and state organizations?
Correct.
Probably not. So to your point, I think it's going to be a time where we see a transition away from those even more, not just in the private sector, but probably also in the public sector.
Oh, I agree completely. So I also, too, is a fixed income source. There are people out there that have annuities. Annuities are a separate individual topic, which we'll devote a whole episode to annuities at some point. But then you also have flexible sources like your 401ks, IRAs, Roth accounts, you have brokerage accounts, cash accounts. You got a lot of different sources that are flexible that could be used. But the real reality here is trying to stay tax efficient in retirement and know when and what income to pull and when, particularly tax efficiency. So one of the things we constantly talk about with people is the fact that taxes do erode money. Great that you have all of this money coming in on your IRA or 401k. But, we'll take two people. One over here has $100,000 a year coming in from their IRAs or 401ks. And then the other one over here also has $100,000 coming in from a mixed variety of sources. The person over here, we're just going to put them in a 30% tax bracket. So they're going to lose 30% of that money to federal, state taxation. They net 70 on 100,000. But the person over here has 100,000 coming in, but 30,000 of it is coming from tax advantage investments that they're not paying any taxes on. So we take that, we set that to the side. They're paying taxes on only 70. That's 70,000, and we're just going to leave it at the same apple to apple comparison. Tax at 30%. They lose 21,000 of that to taxes. So we minus that out. They net 49. We add the 30 back in. And this person has $79,000 of usable functional income. This person only 70. So if you build a plan correct and you can get some of that money coming in on a tax-free or a tax-advantaged basis, you can definitely make the difference between those two. So once you're in retirement, you've got to be wise in where you produce that money to keep the taxes from crushing you.
I think the underlying point there is having options. Right? I think some people really gravitate towards some of the fixed sources because, there's some security there, right? If the stock market goes up or down, you're getting your fixed check. If you think about it, the stock market fluctuates. Your Social Security check doesn't change. If you're getting a pension, your pension check doesn't change. Even an annuity, you get a lot of annuities you've started receiving that you've annuitized that annuity. You're going to get your monthly check for life regardless of what's happening in the market. Now, the issue there, though, is with those streams of income, as the name implies, they're fixed, so you can't control how much you're getting. If you need more, you need less. If tax law changes, to your point, you want to be more tax efficient one year or the next. You can't really control the taxation of those. They're coming to you whether you need them or whether you don't. So having that mix of fixed sources, flexible sources, and then even within the flexible sources, like you were mentioning, having money that's taxed at different rates just allows you to not only control the money better, but control your taxes, because taxes are a large cost in retirement. And if you can keep them down, you can limit them. Why not pay less taxes?
And if there was one little snippet out of this whole episode right here that you could grab onto, if you're thinking about retirement, you got to remember one concept. Any income that you have coming in that's going to be guaranteed, whether it's an insurance company through an annuity or it's a pension source, those rates of return are given a guarantee by the pension company, the insurance company, even Social Security. And the reason why those rates don't change is that the people that provided that to you, had to make a guarantee that they could provide it to you over your life expectancy. So anytime you go for anything guaranteed, like a CD, a fixed annuity, things like that, you're going to get a guaranteed amount, but you're going to get it at a lower rate of return. Anything that's guaranteed is going to give you a lower rate of return. People complain about Social Security. The inflation rate or the CPI that they give is actually lower than what the actual cost of living is since the 1980s when this all got redone. Well, that's a reality because if they were to give you the actual real price of inflation, Social Security system would actually go completely under because it can't keep pace with it. There's just not enough guaranteed money to make that happen. So if you go for guarantees, your interest rate's going to be lower.
Yeah, and I think to your point is as you're building this plan and you're looking at these different sources of income, fixed, flexible, Roth, traditional, pre-tax, etc., you're building in conservative scenarios because as we've kind of walked through these steps, you put together the outflows, you compare that to the inflows, but you also, all the ancillary things, and you even alluded to one of them, things like inflation, things like growth rates on your invested assets. You want to be using conservative numbers because what if you get into retirement and you were only assuming a 2% inflation rate and inflation is 4%? Well, your whole plan is now useless essentially because you didn't factor in the raises you were going to need and the changes.
Correct.
So, the idea behind that is you kind of, you plan for the worst, you hope for the best. So that way, when you're running these numbers, you're getting a high enough probability scenario where it's a high enough chance of succeeding, which is what you want to see. But even if you don't meet that level of success as defined by the projection or the report itself, well, you're still maybe living below the numbers that were used in that projection.
So what we do when we create a plan through the eMoney Click Advisor platform that we're using, and other advisors and other people out there, other planners use similar planning tools. We actually create a scenario with inflation, and we've been using an inflation rate that's been higher than what's been reported over the last 30 years. So we're on the plus side of 3. But in that inflation plan, we also map it out, and it's based on what a person feels like, their age could be. Most people don't come in and say, yeah, put me at age 100, when their parents lived until their mid 60s or early 70s, that normally you don't get that. But we try to put in a reasonable age that people feel good about saying, well, this would be likely my mortality. But when we get done putting that plan together, like Ryan said, we try to use more conservative numbers. I've actually had clients say, well, my rate of return's been much higher than that. Why are we using a lower number? That's because we want to be a little bit more conservative about how it gets presented. On that note, though, when we do the plan, it goes through a Monte Carlo analysis. In that Monte Carlo analysis, they test all the scenarios up and down, all over the place.
1,000 hypothetical scenarios.
Of it to fail
or
succeed. And so when we get that scenario and we're looking at 85% or better, that's when we're ready to sail. It's nice if we can keep it in the 90s, but 85% is work. I have had some clients retire in the low 80% range. They were comfortable with that. I've not had a client yet fail in their retirement. Don't plan on having that happen anytime soon. But I do think using conservative numbers, getting people at that 85 percentile mark, that we know they're going to make it. We know that they're going to pass this test.
Right. So we're talking, we're saying conservative. We're talking long life expectancies, lower rates of return, and then higher inflation levels. And the idea is, the hope is that on each of those, your real life is potentially, on the less conservative side of those numbers.
Right.
And, that way, if you're outperforming it, great. If you're underperforming, not so much. So that's why we want to, extend a lot of those.
One of the areas that oftentimes people get a little confused about is when we do a plan, we put together a plan that actually includes the taxation on their assets. So if it's coming from their IRAs, their required minimum distributions or additional distributions, we have to put those taxations in. We have to put capital gains taxes in for the non-qualified assets or assets that are tax-free. They get labeled appropriately. So the one caveat to all of this is we don't determine what the tax rates will be in the future. So that's why you have to build a plan that has flexibility to it, because we really don't know. Now, I told my clients 20 years ago, when they were in their 40s or late 40s, early 50s, that when you retire, it's likely you're going to be in a similar bracket as where you are today. And unfortunately, that came true. So the people that were retiring now, we look at their tax bracket, then I look at their financial plan, and we got it right, because taxes have gone up over the years just to take care of whatever. Whether you agree or disagree with the government taxation, it makes no difference. It's coming your way, baby, so you got to make sure you pay for it. So the reality is taxes do go up. We don't control that. But if you have a plan that's flexible enough that you can move and make things happen within your portfolio to protect you from that, then you're in a good spot.
And that's something where, I've had clients or even prospective clients in the past have asked, well, can we just, can we run a retirement projection? And is that something you just give me that I can follow in retirement? And, the answer to that is really no. And the reason for that answer is just the point you were making, is a projection is a fixed line, a fixed scenario. Life is not going to be this fixed scenario. It's going to throw curveballs. It's going to go in directions you maybe never thought it would have. And so you need to be able, or even things you can't control, like legislation, tax law changes. I mean, we just saw a tax law change just this year coming into place for 2025. And so, and into 2026. And so that being said, you need to have the ability to pivot. You have the ability to change and adjust your plan as life does, as legislation does, as taxes change, and so on and so forth. So, it's a long story short being the the ability to just kind of have a set structure of you're going to pull this much money from these sources this year, next year, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's good for the year it's created. But really, once you get 1, 2, definitely 3 years in the future, you're almost always going to need to tweak it.
I would say that our advisory services are just as active for our retirees as it is for the pre-retirees because we're always adjusting for something. Could be health issues with a spouse or a child or a grandchild. It could be issues that come up where all of a sudden they've changed a little bit of an objective or maybe a big objective in
change in their living situation.
Right, correct. Yep. So when that happens, you have to jump in. And so you're right. It's not like here's a plan, good luck, see you later. But if you have the resources, you don't get a do-over in retirement. I mean, this is it. You're done working. You don't have that career anymore. So that someday window is a here now window. And I think, we talked about having the someday window at the beginning. When you're in that retirement phase, it's a here now window.
It is.
And you need to be able to look at it, and that vision that you originally had, that landscape might have altered a little bit, but it should be pretty much on the vision with the plan that you established for yourself.
It should. And, I think to your point of no do-overs, I think if you're someone listening to this and you've still got maybe a little bit of time until retirement, prioritize it, because there are loans for other goals out there. I've seen, I'll use parents as an example. I've seen some parents prioritize things like paying down their mortgage or paying for their kids' college education. And, there are loans for those things. Mm-hmm. There are avenues to help pay for those things that you can, spread them out over time and not forego something where there are no loans, being retirement, for that longer term goal. So point being, make sure when you have that vision, you have that plan, prioritize retirement, even though it may be a long-term vision for some people. You want to prioritize it as soon as possible and not think, well, I'll save for it when I make more, or after I pay off some debt, or take care of this, take care of that. Make sure it's that priority from day one.
And let me give a real practical demonstration here of what we're talking about. We have some retirees that basically gliding into retirement, and they've been semi-retired for a while now. And then they decided that they wanted to move closer to where their children are in another state. And it would require them actually selling off a lot of assets and paying a lot of taxes in order to buy that property. So with tools that we have available for them and for them to be provided, we offered them some leverage, some way to loan against their portfolio to temporarily to buy that property until their home here can sell, and also to use an equity loan on their current mortgage-free property, which is hard to do when people have paid off a mortgage. But it made sense to them because otherwise they're going to get whack-daddied with all this income coming out of their qualified plans. And why, not leverage an asset that is dormant? That's not using it you're not doing anything with it. You take the leverage on it and buy it, and eventually that leverage is going to be gone. Now they may very well end up having to carry some type of mortgage in their retirement years on this secondary property. But the issue is they're going to be right near where their grandchildren are. They're going to be right near where their children are. They're going to be happy about where they are, and they're building a home that's going to be custom to their vision and what they want. And where they are now, they don't have the family or friends where their home is. So to sell that as a liquidated asset, it's not a problem.
And that wasn't in their plan 5 years ago.
It was not in his plan 5 years ago. Exactly. It all changed.
Right.
But we have the tools and the resources to give them the guidance to get them to that spot. So if they end up having a mortgage of a couple grand a month, it's cheaper than any kind of rent they'd ever have in a property that's their dream property in the perfect location for the perfect thing. But that was not in the plan 5 years ago.
No, I think it's a perfect example to sum up what we've been discussing today. So as we wrap up, to kind of summarize everything we touched on, make sure that when you're building that plan, look at your inflows, but only the changes. You're not just subtracting the things that are going away, but adding the things back in that might be, increasing, getting more expensive. Compare that to your inflows, compare those outflows to what's coming in, and then use those numbers, those calculations to build that plan. And create that vision and that roadmap, into your retirement.
Exactly. So we went from a someday window to here we are now window.
Yes.
And that's where we want you to be. Thank you for watching and joining us today. And remember, live today for the tomorrow that's in your heart.
Because you'll never have more time to plan for tomorrow than you do today.
Thank you for joining us.
Bread and butter. winner.